From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
The Central Intelligence Agency lost control of its entire cyber weapons arsenal. Now, this is a historic act of devastating incompetence to have created such an arsenal and stored it all in one place and not secured it.
Today, a Democracy Now! Exclusive. Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, for the hour. We'll look at the massive trove of secret CIA documents published by WikiLeaks that expose how the agency can hack into personal phones, computers, and televisions all over the world. Plus, we'll talk to Assange about WikiLeaks' actions before the 2016 election, when they published tens of thousands of internal emails from the Democratic National Committee and Hillary Clinton's campaign chair, John Podesta. Was Russia the source of the emails? The FBI has suggested it was, but indirectly.
Do you know whether the Russian intelligence services dealt directly with WikiLeaks or whether they, too, used an intermediary?
We assessed they used some kind of cutout. They didn't deal directly with WikiLeaks, in contrast to DC Leaks and Guccifer 2.0.
We'll get Julian Assange's response, all that and more, coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Global tensions are rising following the United States missile attack on a Syrian air base last week. President Trump said Thursday's attack on the Shayrat air base, which came without U.S. congressional approval, was a response to a chemical weapons attack the Syrian government allegedly launched from the base last week. This attack in Khan Sheikhoun killed 86 civilians, including dozens of children. International allies of the Syrian government, including Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah, have vowed to retaliate against any future attacks against the Syrian regime. On Sunday, the group issued a joint statement saying, quote, "The aggression against Syria oversteps all red lines. We'll react firmly to any aggression against Syria and any infringement of red lines, whoever carries them out," unquote. Over the weekend, Russia also sent a warship armed with cruise missiles to the coast of Syria in response to the U.S. attack. Meanwhile, U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Nikki Haley, now says President Bashar al-Assad's ouster is inevitable.
So there's multiple priorities. Getting Assad out is not the only priority. And so what we're trying to do is obviously defeat ISIS. Secondly, we don't see a peaceful Syria with Assad in there. Thirdly, get the Iranian influence out. And then finally, move towards a political solution, because at the end of the day, this is a complicated situation. There are no easy answers, and a political solution is going to have to happen. But we know that it is not going to be, there's not any sort of option where a political solution is going to happen with Assad at the head of the regime. It just, if you look at his actions, if you look at the situation, it's going to be hard to see a government that's peaceful and stable with Assad.
That was U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Nikki Haley speaking to CNN. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is heading to Russia Tuesday. Ahead of the meeting, Tillerson accused Russia of being partially responsible for the chemical weapons attack, saying, quote, "Either Russia has been complicit or Russia has been simply incompetent," unquote. In Russia, meanwhile, lawmaker Mikhail Yemelyanov has accused the United States of provoking a nuclear war.
This act goes far beyond just Syria, because clearly Russia supports the legal Syrian government and takes part to a certain scale in this conflict. Therefore, such strikes are an act not just against Syria, but also against Russia. Moreover, when Americans were striking the airport, they didn't know if our citizens were there or not. So this situation may lead at least to a repetition of the Cuban Missile Crisis, which almost pushed the world onto the edge of a nuclear war.
The U.S. attack on the airbase appears to have caused little damage to the Syrian regime's military capabilities. The government was able to largely evacuate the Shayrat airbase before the attack, since the U.S. had warned Russia before the missile strikes. On Friday, only hours after the attack, the base was once again operational, and the Syrian military resumed flights. On Saturday, activists say at least one civilian was killed in airstrikes in a residential neighborhood of Khan Sheikhoun, the same town where the chemical weapons attack occurred Tuesday. Majid Khattab, a resident of the town, told the Washington Post, quote, "The American strikes did nothing for us. They can still commit massacres at any time," unquote. Meanwhile, the stocks of the military contractor Raytheon surged following the missile attack, which used 59 of the company's Tomahawk missiles, estimated to cost $1.4 million apiece. As stocks surged, Raytheon added about $1 billion to its market value Friday morning. According to financial disclosure filings, President Trump personally invests in Raytheon, meaning he profited directly from the attack. Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi has imposed a 3-month state of emergency after bombings at 2 Coptic Christian churches killed at least 49 people during Palm Sunday services.
Several steps are to be taken, the first of which will be the declaration of a state of emergency after the necessary legal and constitutional procedures are complete for 3 months in Egypt. We are announcing this state of emergency only to protect our country and secure it and prevent any interference with it.
ISIS has claimed responsibility for the attacks on the St. George's Coptic Church in the northern city of Tanta and the St. Mark's Cathedral in Alexandria. The state of emergency gives al-Sisi's government even further power to continue its crackdown against human rights activists and journalists. It allows the government and its security forces to surveil all communications, confiscate property, arrest anyone suspected of violating the state of emergency laws, and shut down media outlets. On Sunday, Christians mourned the victims of the bombing. This is a priest in Tanta, Tawfiq Kobesh.
Believe me, it's a miserable and painful feeling to go through this cruel experience. We don't expect people who live with us in the same country, people whom we've shared love and friendship with, and who are familiar with us, to do these things.
The Pentagon is sending an aircraft carrier and several warships towards the Korean peninsula in a major escalation of the conflict between the U.S. and North Korea. The decision to deploy the aircraft carrier known as the Carl Vinson and 3 guided missile destroyers and cruisers to the peninsula came only days after North Korea launched its latest ballistic missile test. This missile reportedly flew only 37 miles. NBC News is reporting, citing unnamed military officials, that the National Security Council has presented President Trump with a series of options on North Korea, which include deploying U.S. nuclear weapons to South Korea's Osan air base. This would mark the U.S.'s first overseas nuclear deployment since the end of the Cold War. Another option reportedly presented to President Trump is the assassination of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. In Washington, D.C., Neil Gorsuch is being sworn in as a Supreme Court justice today. Chief Justice John Roberts will administer the oath. On Friday, Gorsuch was confirmed by the Senate in a 54-45 vote after Republican lawmakers invoked the so-called nuclear option, changing the Senate's rules in order to allow Gorsuch to be confirmed by a simple majority. Gorsuch has a long history of ruling against workers in cases involving federal race, sex, age, disability, and political discrimination and retaliation claims. His confirmation was opposed by Democratic lawmakers, including Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer.
I hope Judge Gorsuch has listened to our debate here in the Senate, particularly about our concerns about the Supreme Court increasingly drifting towards becoming a more pro-corporate court that favors employers, corporations, and special interests over working America.
Neil Gorsuch will fill the seat left vacant more than a year ago after Justice Antonin Scalia died February 2016. Senate Republicans refused to consider President Obama's Supreme Court nomination of Merrick Garland. Gorsuch's swearing in today will end the longest Supreme Court vacancy since 1862. The journalistic monitoring group Air Wars says dozens of civilians have reportedly been killed in Iraq over the last week by airstrikes carried out by either the U.S.-led coalition or the U.S.-backed Iraqi army. On April 4th, 20 civilians, including children, were reportedly killed in West Mosul by airstrikes. The next day, on April 5th, more than 25 civilians were reportedly killed by multiple airstrikes on neighborhoods across West Mosul. Another airstrike that same day on Anbar province reportedly killed 8 civilians, including 4 children. Also on April 5th, airstrikes on a village to the northwest of Mosul reportedly killed up to 40 civilians. The airstrikes are part of the U.S. and Iraqi military's months-long campaign to retake the city of Mosul from ISIS. In Somalia, at least 15 people were killed in a car bombing targeting senior military officials in the capital, Mogadishu, on Sunday. The militant group al-Shabaab claimed responsibility for the attack, which destroyed a minibus carrying civilians, killing everyone on board. In Kashmir, Indian forces killed at least 8 civilians Sunday after the soldiers opened fire on protesters demonstrating against Indian rule of the territory. The demonstrations came during an election to fill a parliament seat, which was made vacant after a lawmaker resigned in protest of the killing of civilians during last summer's crackdown by Indian security forces in Kashmir. In Sweden, thousands of people gathered Sunday in Stockholm's Central Square to commemorate the victims of an attack on Friday, in which 4 people died and 15 more were injured after a man drove into a crowd of people. The police say the suspected attacker was an Uzbek asylum seeker whose application had been rejected and had been given 4 weeks to leave Sweden in December. Authorities say the man who's been arrested had shown support for extremist groups such as ISIS. Pentagon officials say a U.S. Special Forces soldier was killed in Afghanistan over the weekend. The soldier, who's not been identified, was killed Saturday night in Nangarhar province. Pentagon officials say the death came as U.S. and Afghan military were carrying out a joint operation against militants affiliated with ISIS in Achin district. In Texas, thousands of people rallied in downtown Dallas Sunday to protest President Trump's plans for mass deportations, as well as his failed attempts to ban refugees and people from some majority Muslim nations from entering the United States. This is civil rights activist Martin Luther King III speaking at the rally.
What is important about this demonstration, in my judgment, is it's Christians, it's Muslims, it's Jews, it's Hindus, it's people who may not have a belief, but the fact that Americans are coming together saying we as America can and must do better.
Arizona Governor Doug Ducey has signed legislation that dramatically pushes education privatization by making every one of Arizona's public school students eligible to receive state money to attend a private or religious school. The legislation was approved by the Arizona House and Senate with no support from a single Democratic lawmaker. Education Secretary Betsy DeVos is a major backer of these types of private school voucher programs, which divert public funding out of the public school system. In more education news, New York State is making tuition free at public universities for families with annual income of under $125,000 a year. The free tuition plan, which will be phased in over the next 3 years, will cover all City University of New York and State University of New York colleges and universities. The governor's office says the plan will affect nearly 1 million families across New York State. And an update to a case we've been following. One of New York's best-known immigrant rights advocates will not face deportation tomorrow. Ravi Ragbir, executive director of the New Sanctuary Coalition, had been ordered to check in with Immigration and Customs Enforcement Tuesday, even though he reported for another check-in just last month. Accompanied by a number of city council members, a state senator, as hundreds rallied outside. Officials now say he can check in next January. This is Ravi Ragbir describing how accompaniment works.
When we partner U.S. citizens with immigrants who are in this crisis, not only for myself, but many others, they are able to get the support from the community, and so they are not in this fearful space, but also getting the officers to treat that person with respect.
Faith groups are planning to hold an interfaith Seder on Tuesday morning at 26 Federal Plaza in New York City to call for lasting immigration reform. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman.
And I'm Juan Gonzalez. Welcome to all of our listeners and viewers around the country and around the world. Today, we spend the hour with Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks. It's been nearly 5 years since he entered the Ecuadorian embassy in London seeking political asylum, fearing a Swedish arrest warrant could lead to his extradition to the United States. Despite being holed up in the embassy, Assange's impact is still being felt across the globe. His asylum case recently became an issue in the Ecuadorian presidential election. The right-wing candidate Guillermo Lasso had vowed to remove Assange from the embassy if he won. But Lasso lost to President Rafael Correa's former vice president, Lenín Moreno, who said Assange is welcome to stay. Meanwhile, WikiLeaks recently began releasing a massive trove of secret CIA documents exposing how the agency has developed tools to hack into and spy on principal phones, computers, and televisions all over the world. WikiLeaks described the leak as the largest ever release of confidential documents on the CIA.
WikiLeaks' activity before the 2016 election is also still generating headlines. Just before the Democratic National Convention last July, WikiLeaks published 20,000 internal emails from the Democratic National Committee. Within 2 days, the head of the DNC, Debbie Wasserman Schultz, resigned her post, in part because the emails showed the DNC worked behind the scenes to discredit and defeat Bernie Sanders, who is challenging Hillary Clinton for the nomination. Less than 3 months later, WikiLeaks began publishing internal emails from Clinton's campaign chairman, John Podesta. Soon, Donald Trump was praising WikiLeaks on the campaign trail.
This just came out. WikiLeaks, I love WikiLeaks.
Between October 7th and Election Day, WikiLeaks would go on to publish 20,000 of Podesta's emails, generating a rash of negative stories about the Clinton campaign.
U.S. intelligence agencies have accused Russia of hacking the DNC and Podesta accounts, but many questions still remain about what happened. During a recent congressional hearing, FBI Director James Comey placed the blame on Russia intelligence when questioned by Congressman Adam Schiff.
Do you know whether the Russian intelligence services dealt directly with WikiLeaks or whether they, too, used an intermediary?
We assessed they used some kind of cutout. They didn't deal directly with WikiLeaks, in contrast to DC Leaks and Guccifer 2.0.
That was FBI Director James Comey on March 20th. Well, joining us now from the Ecuadorian Embassy in London is Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks. Julian, welcome back to Democracy Now!
Good morning, Amy.
Did Russia leak the documents, either the DNC documents or the John Podesta emails, to WikiLeaks?
We have said quite clearly that our source is not a member of any state, including the Russian government. Now, if you look at these statements by James Comey, James Clapper, going back a couple of months, statements by Barack Obama, they all are harmonious with our description. Now, what the U.S. investigation by James Comey seems to be trying to say, at least in public, is that they perceived that there was some Russian hacking, or at least some hacking from somewhere, of the DNC, other institutions of the United States. In fact, the allegations are that several thousands of people were hacked in those operations.
But how do you know? How do you know it's not Russia? How do you know it's not a state actor? Since you usually say you don't know who gives you documents.
We look very closely at our publications. We tend to come to a good understanding of them, and so we're not willing to go into details about our source because it might describe the sort of person they are, the sort of jurisdiction that they're in, which could put them at risk. But we have said clearly that our source is not a member of a Russian state, and even the US government is not suggesting that our source is a member of a Russian state. And what appears to be going on is that there have been observations of hacking of thousands of people, or attempted hacking of thousands of people. That's quite normal in intelligence gathering activity before an election. Presumably that's being carried out by many states. I would be surprised if that doesn't include Russia. And over here, there's the publications of WikiLeaks. And what there isn't is something in between the middle. So there's an allegation that, well, if there's been hacking here and there's publication over here, then these must be directly, causally, intentionally related. But so far, there's no evidence for that.
Julian, I want to turn to a Democratic Congressman, Adam Schiff, speaking at a hearing of the House Intelligence Committee last month.
Later in July and after the convention, the first stolen emails detrimental to Hillary Clinton appear on WikiLeaks. A hacker who goes by the moniker Guccifer2 claims responsibility for hacking the DNC and giving the documents to WikiLeaks. But leading private cybersecurity firms, including CrowdStrike, Mandiant, and ThreatConnect, review the evidence of the hack and conclude with high certainty that it was the work of APT-28 and APT-29, who are known to be Russian intelligence services. The U.S. intelligence community also later confirms that the documents were in fact stolen by Russian intelligence, and Guccifer2 acted as a front. Also in late July, candidate Trump praises WikiLeaks, says he loves them, and openly appeals to the Russians to hack his opponents' emails, telling them that they will be richly rewarded by the press.
That was Congressman Adam Schiff. Julian, I'm wondering if you could respond to some of the things he's saying in that statement.
Well, Mr. Schiff is a Democratic congressman who's trying to whip up a kind of neo-McCarthyist fervor in order to distract from the epic failure of Hillary Clinton and that team when they lost, of all people, to Donald Trump. So it's not particularly interesting. I think we should pull back and put things in context. The United States government, since 1950, has intervened in 81 elections, interfered, to use Schiff's language, in 81 elections. That is not including coups, which have overthrown the government. So there's a long history of the United States doing this to places around the world in infamous ways, and most recently alleged interference in the election of Israel. So I think we should understand that the United States is in a glass house when it comes to allegations of attempting to interfere with or influence election results. But let's look at what is the real meat of this issue. How is it alleged that Russia has interfered in the US election process? Well, they say there's been a variety of hacks. Well, that's quite normal intelligence gathering process as far as can be determined, and a few extremely ineffectual websites such as DC Leaks or Guccifer 2.0 that no one really paid any attention to. And then there's our publications, which people really did pay attention to. Now, what is in our publications? Well, from our perspective, we have just published accurately and fairly what Hillary Clinton said her positions were in her secret speeches to Goldman Sachs and in relation to the DNC and its attempt to rig the election to exclude the primary process, to exclude Bernie Sanders. So at the heart of this issue is whether people were told the truth about Hillary Clinton and the DNC. If there hadn't been an ugly truth there, it wouldn't have made any difference. There was an ugly truth, and we published accurately and fairly that ugly truth. Now, our source wasn't from the Russian state, but if it had been from a state, would we have suppressed that information before an election, or would we have accurately and fairly published it? Of course we would have published it.
Well, but I wanted to ask you, in relation to what you said, we've had other guests on, for instance, Scott Horton, who said, yes, you're absolutely right. The United States has been involved in seeking to destabilize governments and overthrow governments all over the world. But Horton said that there's a difference between what Russia attempted to do and whether anyone in the Trump administration colluded with Russia or helped or cooperated or had conversations with the Russians as they were seeking to destabilize the U.S. elections. And Scott Horton says that would be definitely a problematic issue for Trump. I'm wondering your thoughts about that.
I would agree. That would be interesting and unusual. I don't think it's true. I think it is interesting that early on that Trump and people around him took a position of rapprochement towards Russia, a very strong position of rapprochement towards Russia, and not a classically Republican position. I think that is interesting. It is somewhat compatible with Trump's statements going back a very long time. But I would be surprised if that turns out to be significant. Why do I say that? Trump had very little business success in Russia. He hasn't managed to build a hotel in Russia. He hasn't gotten any, as far as can be determined, any good deals in Russia. And when you see him making statements during the election campaign on the stage, hey, Russia, if you've got those emails, give them to the press, they'll be very pleased about it. When you see statements like that, this is not the sort of statement that you make if you already have a communications channel and you're already engaged in an active conspiracy. For people like Paul Manafort, that's someone who's perfectly capable of engaging in let's say, dodgy activities. They have a long history of working for various parties in different ways. Have they asked for support through Paul Manafort? Maybe. But if you're looking at the top level involving Trump, what I see is a great weakness in an ability to get anything concretely done in Russia.
You know, while Trump may or may not have investments in Russia, it's very clear the oligarchs in Russia have bailed him out to the tune of tens of millions of dollars, if not more, in the United States when he was building buildings, having gone bankrupt many times, hard to get a line of credit in places like just right near DemocracyNow, Trump Soho, a major building project downtown Manhattan. But I wanted to turn back to Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff speaking at a hearing of the House Intelligence Committee last month.
On August 8th, Roger Stone, a longtime Trump political advisor and self-proclaimed political dirty trickster, boasts in a speech that he has communicated with Assange and that more documents would be coming, including an October surprise. In the middle of August, he also communicates with a Russian cutout Guccifer II and authors a Breitbart piece denying Guccifer's links to Russian intelligence. Then later in August, Stone does something truly remarkable when he predicts that John Podesta's personal emails will soon be published. Trust me, he says, it will soon be Podesta's time in the barrel, #CrookedHillary. In the weeks that follow, Stone shows a remarkable prescience. I have total confidence that WikiLeaks and my hero, Julian Assange, will educate the American people soon, he says, #LockHerUp. Payload coming, he predicts, and 2 days later, it does. WikiLeaks releases its first batch of Podesta emails. The release of John Podesta's emails would then continue on a daily basis up until the election.
And this is Trump advisor Roger Stone speaking on August 8th.
With regard to the October surprise, what would be your forecast on that, given what Julian Assange has intimated he's going to do?
Well, it could be any number of things. I actually have communicated with Assange. I believe the next tranche of his documents pertain to the Clinton Foundation, but there's no telling what the October surprise may be.
That was Roger Stone speaking August 8th in Broward County, Florida. If you could respond to the substance of what they're saying, Julian, and explain what is your relationship with Roger Stone?
Well, I don't want to be an apologist for these people, but really party politics in the United States is something that everyone has to get away from. This creation of two polarities by different elites that then suck up all the political energy in the country. Well, we can talk a little bit later about what's happened to the Trump administration and this fascinating process that we've been seeing about how many days does it take for the security sector to digest the president. Something like 75 appears to be the answer. Okay, Roger Stone, I've never communicated with the guy. He's never communicated with me, other than very recently to say, what are you doing saying that we have communicated? Please explain, because as far as all our records are concerned, we haven't. He has simply brilliantly inserted himself into this equation. Now, remember, Stone was pushed out in 2015 from the Trump campaign. When WikiLeaks was engaged in its publications exposing interference in the primary process at the DNC, that was the biggest thing on the political radar for that time period. And so Stone, having nowhere to be, decided to suggest that he had communications with us. But let's look at his predictions. He predicted that our publications were going to be about the Clinton Foundation. He was wrong. All his other predictions, where they're accurate, are statements that we made in public. We said we had information about Hillary Clinton, that we were going to publish it, etc. So when you hear Adam Schiff saying, oh, that Roger Stone said that there's that WikiLeaks publications are coming, I was saying on TV interviews that we had publications that were coming that were about Hillary Clinton. So Stone predicted that we were going to publish on October 4. We didn't publish on October 4. That was our 10-year anniversary, etc. Literally, there's no predictions that he has made in relation to us that have come true that have not been public. So I think, you have to admire the chutzpah of how he has played on democratic desires to see a connection and has exploited that in order to sell his books and in order to gain prominence. I mean, it's very impressive. He just simply lays out a piece of bait that he understands that the democratically aligned press will leap forward slavishly and put that hook in their mouth.
Julian, we have to break.
Because it suits him.
But we're going to come back to this conversation. Julian Assange, founder and editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, speaking to us from inside the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he has been holed up for almost 5 years. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back with Julian in a moment.
That's great. It starts with an earthquake, birds and snakes, an airplane, and Lenny Bruce is not afraid. I have a hurricane. Listen to yourself. Churn world serves its own needs. Dummy serve your own needs. Beat it up an ox, speak grunt, no strength. The ladder starts to clatter with fear. Fight down, high wire in a fire. Represented 7 games in the government for hire in a combat site. Left to us and coming in a hurry with the furies beating down your neck. Team by team reporters baffle Trump, tethered crop. Look at that, no plane. Fine, then, overflow. Population common food, but it'll do. Save yourself, serve yourself. World serves its own needs. Listen to your heartbeat. Dummy with the rapture and the reverend and the right. Right, you patriotic, slam, fight, bright, light, feeling, pretty sight. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. It's the end of the world as we know it. And I feel fine. 6 o'clock TV hour, don't get caught in foreign tower, slash and burn, return. Listen to yourself churn. Locking in uniform and book, burning blood, letting every motive escalate.
It's the end of the world as we know it, and I Feel Fine by R.E.M. here on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, WikiLeaks has published what it says is the largest leak of secret CIA documents in history. The thousands of documents, dubbed Vault 7, describe CIA programs and tools that are capable of hacking into both Apple and Android cell phones. By hacking into entire phones, the CIA is then reportedly able to bypass encrypted messenger programs such as Signal, Telegram, and WhatsApp. Although, contrary to many news reports, the documents do not show the CIA has developed tools to hack these encrypted services themselves. The documents also outline a CIA and British intelligence program called Weeping Angel, through which the spy agency can hack into a Samsung smart television and turn it into a surveillance device that records audio conversations, even when it appears to be off.
To talk more about the Vault 7 documents, we're going back to the Ecuadorian embassy in London. We already are joined by Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks. Talk about the significance of this latest release of documents, Julian, that WikiLeaks has engaged in.
Vault 7 is the largest intelligence leak in history. We've published so far less than 1% of that material. Now, so far, the publications that we have published reveal that the Central Intelligence Agency has decided to create, in the last 10 years, its own captive version of the National Security Agency, not specialized in bulk interception, but specialized in semi-automated hacking processes. That's creation of viruses, Trojans, etc., to put in people's computer systems, telephones, TVs, and have those then report back to CIA listening posts that collect that information and ingest it into the broader CIA process. And also information can be pushed using these mechanisms on to those telephones, computers, et cetera, to, for example, plant information that could implicate someone falsely or perhaps even truly in a crime. So I think it's significant that as the Central Intelligence Agency gained budgetary and political preeminence of the National Security Agency, which used to have a bit bigger budget. In the post-9/11 environment, the CIA's budget is now increased to about 1.5 times that of the National Security Agency. So in response to that increased political power, where increased budgetary spend comes from, it has created its own effective air force using drones and its own large hacker squad. So it is able to do things internally that it would previously have to go out for others to do. So the Central Intelligence Agency, like all institutions, is maximizing its institutional power. And it is slowly succeeding compared to other institutions. Now, in response to the various disclosures about the National Security Agency, most importantly, the Edward Snowden disclosures of 2013, industry has responded to market demand in various places, and various engineers ideologically also invested in this to introduce encryption in WhatsApp, in Signal, more types of encrypted email, and so on. Now, the Central Intelligence Agency's hacking approach does not target the intermediaries like the National Security Agency does for these bulk intercepts. Instead, it targets the endpoints, and then it doesn't need to worry about the encryption. For example, if you and I, Amy, are communicating using, say, Signal on a smartphone, on an Apple or Android, then the Signal encryption protocol is actually quite good. And as far as is known, it cannot be decrypted by an intermediary, bulk spying on communications traffic going across the Atlantic, like the National Security Agency does. But if either you or I have our phones hacked, and the CIA software specializes in doing this, it means that encryption doesn't matter, because the information is gathered either before it's encrypted or after it is decrypted.
Well, Julian, in terms of the material you have released so far, you did redact any of the computer codes that you got access to, and you offered to have companies that may be affected by this, tech companies, to provide them the code so they could fix any vulnerabilities. Have any companies taken you up on the offer?
Yes, that's a very interesting process, and we knew that it would be. So we made this offer publicly. And we also wrote to a number of the large companies such as Apple, Microsoft, Google, Mozilla, which produces the Mozilla browser, etc. Now, the European companies responded almost immediately. Some even approached us. A couple of US companies, such as Mozilla, responded immediately, and we were also approached by a security engineer at Cisco. Google, Apple, and Microsoft took 8 or 9 days, depending on the company, to respond. Now, that means that they were putting all the users at risk for 8 or 9 days. What was happening in that 8 or 9 days? Well, we hear, we're not sure it's true for all of the companies, but we hear from one of the companies that what was happening is that they were engaging their lawyers, they've been worried about the politics, et cetera, et cetera. My guess is that on the legal front, a type of collaboration involving classified material, it could be argued to be conspiracy to commit espionage. Now, of course, that's not actually practically possible in the US court system or politically possible. And then these companies have individuals within them who have security clearances because they work on classified projects for the government. And particularly the security divisions of Apple, Google, Microsoft, etc., have people with security clearances in them and who might lose their security clearances if they're engaged in working on information that is being distributed not through a formal process. So what you see in the all those big three taking 8 or 9 days is some kind of collaboration, either directly with each other or through a third party, say like the Department of Justice, to understand what role that they're going to play. And the role that they ended up playing is saying, no, we don't agree to fix anything which we had asked for within 90 days. No, we don't agree to say that any fix came from you. This was our requirement. Instead, you can just throw something at our regular security reporting mechanism. So what's going on there? Well, no record of collaboration in a formal sense or in a political sense that could be used to make political problems for those companies in terms of their contracts with the United States government or potentially introduce problems in relation to the Espionage Act or security clearances. That's my supposition. We don't know that's true for sure. We know that some of that is true for at least one of these companies. But looking at the timing, it's very unusual that Google, Microsoft, and Apple all wrote back to us on the 8th or 9th day, whereas the other companies wrote back immediately or at various times.
Julian, we have to break again. We're coming back to this conversation. Julian Assange, founder and editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks, speaking to us from the Ecuadorian embassy in London. This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute. Bless This Mess by Lisa Mitchell here on Democracy Now!, DemocracyNow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez.
Well, in October, The Intercept published a conversation between Glenn Greenwald and Naomi Klein about WikiLeaks' decision to disclose thousands of John Podesta's personal emails. This is part of what Naomi Klein said.
I would add, it's not just that they didn't curate it and just dumped it all, right? They are dumping it, but they are doling out the dumps, right, to maximize damage, right? So they're not just saying, hey, information wants to be free, here's everything we have. Journalists have a field day, go through it, right? They're very clearly looking for maximum media attention. You can tell that just by looking at the WikiLeaks, Twitter feed, and timing it, right before the debates. You've written about how dangerous it is for media organizations to be taking such a highly political approach to this election, because they so clearly don't want Trump to get elected. So they're engaging in what you've described as journalistic fraud, right? I agree with you.
Right.
But we have to acknowledge how political WikiLeaks and Julian are being here.
That was Naomi Klein in October. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange, your response to some of her remarks?
Well, I think it's a bit rich for Naomi Klein, who's a very wealthy woman sitting up there in Canada, to be accusing a political prisoner who's been detained for the last 7 years without charge in violation of 2 UN rulings without getting her facts straight. So what is WikiLeaks to do? Sit on and suppress evidence of interference in the DNC process? Wait until after the DNC Congress to publish that information? That would be deeply unethical for this organization. I would argue it would be deeply unethical for any media organization, but for this organization it would be deeply unethical. We have a commitment to the public that we will not suppress information like that, and we have a commitment to sources who come forward taking risks to give us information that we will publish it in a timely fashion once we have verified that it is completely accurate. Now, do we wish that we had more money and could process information faster? Of course we do. But we did manage to get that publication out before the DNC, and I think that was very important so that people involved in that process could understand who it was that they were choosing to go for. Now, let's be realistic. Naomi has a particular issue, a very important issue, and I agree it's an important issue, which is climate change. And so she was willing to attack anyone in her campaign to make sure Hillary Clinton was elected because she perceived that Hillary Clinton would do better on climate change. And I agree it's a very serious issue. But in relation to WikiLeaks, we are an organization that has a commitment to the public to publish true information and not suppress it, and to make sure that as many people read it as possible. Is it true that the way that we staged our publishing process increased the engagement of people in reading our material, going through it, et cetera, et cetera? Of course it is. Did we do a good job? Did we do a good job in getting people, enticing people to read and report on our material? Yes, we did. And we will do that for any source, any whistleblower that comes to us and gives us information. And we will try and maximize the amount of readers that come as a result of the risks that those people take. That's our promise to the public, to our readers, and to our sources.
You know, early in the campaign, Naomi did write an article that clearly supporting Bernie Sanders, writing Hillary Clinton cannot be trusted. But we are also joined by Alan Nairn, longtime investigative journalist and activist. Alan, if you can weigh in this discussion right now as we talk to Julian Assange and the Ecuadorian embassy.
Well, I have a brief question for Julian Assange. Mr. Assange, you said that you did not get the leaks directly from a state. You said you did not get the leaks directly from a state. Do you know that Russia didn't give you the leaks through an intermediary?
I'm not going to be playing 20 questions on our sources. I'm sure you understand, Alan, as a source protection organization, we're not going to be inscribing circles around who our sources are, how we communicate with them, any properties that might be used to arrest them or criticize them in some future process.
So it is possible that, as Comey said, Russia gave you the leaks through an intermediary?
I'm simply not going to comment on it.
Okay. Well, my view of this is that during the campaign, WikiLeaks often suggested that Trump would be less dangerous than Clinton.
No, we didn't.
I think you did.
No, we didn't.
I think that concept is wildly, gruesomely mistaken. There was the argument Well,
that's fine. It's fine for you to say that, but you should understand that no, we didn't. In fact, I was asked that question directly on Democracy Now! At the time about what my position was, asked which one I preferred. And my response is, being asked this question is being asked, do I prefer cholera or do I prefer gonorrhea?
Okay, well, let's say if you frame it that way, the idea that the two...
Historical revisionism. Historical revisionism is occurring, and you understand why it is occurring, because the Democratic Party had, I think it's lost now, but the Democratic Party had a moment for very important internal reform after its epic loss to Donald Trump. The two, a very disliked candidate as far as the polling is concerned. So the Democratic Party had an epic loss. Who was responsible for that epic loss?
The Democrats.
Well, the Democratic Party was, and its various structures, its institutions, etc.
The Democrats are responsible for that epic loss, no question. But if
was those people telling the public the truth, if those people are not responsible, people take the truth and they absorb it and they think about it and they do what they want with it. And the reality is the American people so disliked what was being offered to them by the Democratic Party that they decided that they preferred to blow it all up rather than have Hillary Clinton. They decided they would throw the Trump grenade.
I agree with that. However, I would note that the Trump campaign thought that WikiLeaks was on their side. Now, the idea that Mr. Assange just suggested that Trump and Clinton were equally dangerous, two different deadly diseases, I think is wildly and gruesomely mistaken. Clinton represented a criminal establishment, but Trump and the people he brought in with him make it worse, make it even more criminal. This idea that it was just a choice between the lesser of two evils. Well, in politics, in life, you fight like hell to have good choices, to have better choices. In this case, Sanders was a better alternative. But once that is no longer possible, then of course you choose the lesser evil. What do you want? More evil? More killing? More pollution? More abuse of immigrants? More racism? More impunity for corporations? More aid to death squads? More spending for the military? All of that is what you get with Trump, in distinction to the other bad things you would have gotten with Clinton. And the win of Clinton was not, or I'm sorry, the victory of Trump was not equally as bad as it would have been if Clinton had lost. It's a catastrophe. It's an utter catastrophe. And those who are poorest, those who are already most oppressed and most vulnerable, are the ones who are suffering most as a result. And we ain't seen nothing yet. They're just getting started. Now, with Gorsuch coming on the Supreme Court, and with the possibility that the legislative filibuster in the Senate will be abolished, as well as the Supreme Court filibuster, if that happens, that will give Trump and the radical Republican right, who now control the Congress, essentially absolute power. The only thing standing in their way will be some federal judges, which means that within the system there will be no blocking power. There will be nothing to stop them. In that case, the only way to stop them will be from outside the federal system, which means in the streets, or from the systems of the states and localities. We're in the midst of a right-wing revolution. I agree that a lot of this discussion about Russia and leaks is misguided, a lot of it, and it's diverting attention from two main facts. One, we're in the midst of a right-wing revolution that must be stopped and reversed. Two, the Democratic establishment discredited themselves, and they have to be removed and replaced by the Democratic base.
Julian, your response, I'd like to also, if you can, talk about, you've mentioned it numerous times, the existence of the deep state and what the relationship of the deep state is to your perspective about what's going on right now in the United States.
Well, look, up until very recently, and I guess we still have to see how it goes, I've been delighted by the conflict that has been occurring between the incoming administration and between the security services, etc. Why is that? Because it has shed light on both. It is resulting in the courts throwing nooses around the power of the presidency and tying them down. And I mean, that's something that I predicted would happen, and it is happening very rapidly. The problem for party politics in the United States is that the Democrats have been in collapse for almost 8 years at the council level, at the state level, and at the national level. So the election of Donald Trump, while he's an unusual person psychologically and Hillary Clinton was a particularly bad candidate, is actually part of something that's much bigger. And it's very interesting to think what that is, and because any solution in terms of party politics has to understand why it is that the democratic machinery has seemingly been in inexorable collapse over the last 8 years. And you can perhaps say it's to do with gross economic factors, perhaps the professionalization of the democratic class, where you have a revolving door of contractors and so on. You can see this in our DNC leaks, that you have educated, professionalized Democrats who have lifted off the working class base and who are then involved in a revolving door system, becoming lobbyists, going back into the DNC, etc. If you read the emails we've published about John Podesta, you can see that this is not just simply something that happens. This is an expectation within that community. And anyone who doesn't engage in that expectation, anyone who doesn't go into private industry and get a $400,000 a year consulting contract as a local or foreign agent, is viewed to be as a fool. So you can only keep up that game for so long, and it starts to turn people off, and you start to lose the base, and that's what happened in this particular run. But
let me get Alan there. Let me get Alan's comment.
I caution Alan strongly. I have a lot of respect for his work, but I caution him strongly to not get swept up into what is an attempt by the Democratic Party in this particular case, but by the two parties, to polarize the population into party politics. There's lots of interesting things that can come out of this Trump administration. We're seeing great horrors, of course, but we are seeing these horrors.
Not so interesting to the people who've been killed and deported.
We're seeing the conflict with the security services, the deep state. Now, I've been writing about the deep state for a decade, using that word. Now, Turkish academics have been writing about the equivalent in Turkey. Some Hungarian investigative journalists the same within Hungary. And finally, this word is now something in US politics. It's not a new concept. It's essentially the military-industrial complex plus lobbyists plus contractors plus people in the Senate Intelligence Committee, et cetera.
We
just all understand what that is.
We just have 30 seconds, Alan, and I wanted to get you a final comment.
The conflict between Trump and the intelligence and the deep state is a spat, not a struggle. Trump has insulted them, he has disrespected them, so they're unhappy with that. More importantly, Trump wants them to change their tactics, to become more crude and even more violent. Once they work together on a couple of new wars, they'll get along just fine.
Well, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank you for joining us, Alan Aaron and Julian. In our last 10 seconds, you're coming up on 5 years in the embassy. How are you doing in the Ecuadorian embassy in London?
Well, last year, I won an epic victory against the UK government and the Swedish government at the UN. Formal ruling. It's repeated in November. Those governments still have to obey the UN. I'm being illegally detained, and I should be freed and compensated. That's according to the UN.
Julian Assange, founder and editor-in-chief of WikiLeaks. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Happy birthday to David Prude. Democracy Now! Produced by Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Sam Malkoff, Johnny Hamilton, Ravi Karen. Thanks for joining us.